Hi, Hunter Hastings here. Can entrepreneurship be taught? More importantly, can it be learned? The answer, according to Bill Aulet, is absolutely yes, without a doubt. And how would Bill know? Well, he is the Ethernet Inventors Professor of the Practice of Entrepreneurship and Managing Director of the Martin Trust Center for Entrepreneurship at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Notice that that's the practice of entrepreneurship and not the theory.
This is the Value Creators Podcast. Value creation is the sole purpose of any business and every business, and for all of us as entrepreneurs. Listen to great value creators as they share their successes, trials, and lessons learned. Join us as we explore how to think as value creators, how to act as value creators, and how to view business through the lens of value creation.
For more than 10 years, Bill has run a venture accelerator at MIT with 20 to 25 teams launching businesses each year. Over 60% of those businesses become long-term successes and have raised significant money in the venture capital market. The methodology of the incubator comes from Bill's famous best-selling book, Disciplined Entrepreneurship. It was released in August 2013, became an award-winning international bestseller because of its accessible and methodological approach to entrepreneurship. And there's a new edition out just this month, and that gives us the occasion to talk to Bill Aulet about disciplined entrepreneurship. Bill, welcome to the Value Creators Podcast.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Hunter. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a great honor for us. You're the great authority on entrepreneurship. You've studied and researched it at MIT, and you run a lab there that researches into entrepreneurship. You've written the definitive book on the subject, Disciplined Entrepreneurship. It's now in a second edition, so that's one of the reasons why we get the pleasure of talking to you today. I wanted to start out at some of the philosophies and principles, Bill, because we're talking a lot today about entrepreneurship as a universal force for good. It aims to make the world a better place, to use that cliche. It's certainly customer-oriented, trying to make people's lives better. We worry about big companies and their managerialism and their bureaucracies and so on, and maybe that's suppressing entrepreneurship. So I want to start out with some of the big picture principles. The first thing you say in the book is entrepreneurship is a mindset. Now, we've been playing with that word. What is a mindset? Can a firm have a mindset? What are you thinking?
It's funny. I've heard this before. Entrepreneurship is a mindset. What I want to say, is it's three things. It's a mindset, a skill set, and it's a way of operating. And I think those are three distinct things. And if I can a mindset is kind of a mental approach to a problem without kind of mechanics of it necessarily. And the way I would summarize that is a lack of comfort with the status quo. An entrepreneur is someone who is kind of, if all the fish are swimming this way, they ask the question, why should we swim the other way? Can't we make things better? And they're not afraid of being different. And you see, since the Industrial Revolution, we've had a lot of there's, and culturally you see this nail that sticks out gets hammered back in. And so it's a lot of conformity. And the thing about entrepreneurship is you're always doing something new. And so you have to have this mentality that new is good, not new is bad. New is good. Change is an opportunity to do something better as opposed to change is bad. And so that's the mentality. We always talk about, to be a great entrepreneur, you have to have the spirit of a pirate. And granted, we're here in New England, so we don't have any bad pirates anymore. So it's easy for us to say this because it's just kind of a metaphor. But it means that, you're willing to go on and do things on your own. And at MIT, this is very compatible with kind of the ethos we have here, which has historically been a hacking mentality. Hacking not being a criminal activity, but kind of a technical feat where you can do something that was done before, but you can do it with a fraction of the resources and you can do it better than the way it historically had been done. So that's the mentality. And I think that everyone says, oh, it's an entrepreneurial, it's just a mindset. I think it's a mindset and a skill set. That is what we go through in the book in great detail, but it's also a way of operating. And if I can jump to that last one, because that's what's usually left out in the book, we really talk about the mechanics of making yourself an entrepreneur. What are the things you need to do? But the way of operating is fundamentally different. And this goes back to, Howard Stevenson at Harvard. He defined entrepreneurship as the pursuit of opportunities with resources beyond your control. And you say, wow, that's interesting. How is that different? Well, when I worked at IBM, and I joined IBM in 81, it was command, control, and conquer. And ever since the Industrial Revolution, you've been taught, get your resources, decrease the risk, control everything. And that's the mentality. But an entrepreneur understands they want to operate in a distributed environment. They don't know what the future is, so they want to have access to lots of resources that really they don't have to pay the full price for. So it's a distributed way of operating as opposed to command, control, and conquer. And it's really those three things: the entrepreneurial mindset, the entrepreneurial skill set, and entrepreneurial way of operating that make you into an entrepreneur. And that being an entrepreneur is not just being a startup founder. It's an entrepreneur in large organizations and government and academic institutions and startups. We need entrepreneurs throughout all of society.
Yeah, agreed. And let's just pursue another part of that. You use the word skill set, but you also say in the book, think of entrepreneurship as a craft and not a science. And corporations are always trying to make management a science. They talk about management science. So what's the implications of craft for a practitioner of entrepreneurship?
Science is an algorithm where you kind of de-risk the solution. You're getting to a known outcome. And that's what Six Sigma is. That's what Taylor time and motion studies, what we've done since the Industrial Revolution. You can argue that is a science. It's very predictable. The nature of entrepreneurship, however, is if it is successful, you're doing something that has never been done before. So there can be no algorithm to do something that's never, because if you do it, then I have to do something different. And therefore, it is always evolving. It's like jazz. It's like basketball. You don't do exactly the same thing over and over again. And so it can't be a science. And then you say, well, then it's art, isn't it? Why don't you just say art? Because art, it's not art, because art, like opera or painting, is something that not everybody can do, quite honestly. It's more like pottery, which we think of as a craft, that everybody can do, and everybody can make unique products. But we can teach people how to do it using first principles. And that's what disciplined entrepreneurship is really about. What are those first principles that don't guarantee you success, but dramatically improve your odds of being successful? And the other key factor about being a craft is no one is going to learn how to be an entrepreneur by listening to this podcast. I'm sorry, Hunter. I wish it wasn't this way. I wish we could give them, the single truth and then send them a box of magic pixie dust and make them entrepreneurs. But you cannot learn a craft by just reading a book or watching a video or listening to a podcast. You must learn it through the apprenticeship model by integrating theory and practice over and over again. A craft has some theory to it. Those are the first principles, but it has a lot of practice as to how you apply those. And that's why I think this, your insight into the book about it's a craft is an important one.
Just as an aside, I've been a partner in a venture capital fund at the seed stage for a few years, and we haven't learned very much, Bill, because it's so random. But we have learned that somebody who's been an entrepreneur 2 or 3 or 4 times in a startup maybe has failed, in quotes, but they're much more likely to be a good bet than somebody who's just running a startup for the first time. So I take that as an endorsement of what you say.
Hunter, that is what the research shows. I mean, when they first asked me to take on this job, I was like, entrepreneurship can't be taught, which is what was the conventional wisdom. I mean, you remember that 10 years ago. You just find an entrepreneur and they have this magical characteristic. And then my mentor, Ed Roberts, God rest his soul, he just passed away over a month ago, sadly. He literally wrote the first book that took entrepreneurship seriously as a research topic. And his finding was, the more times you're an entrepreneur, the more likely you are to be successful. So clearly you're learning something in that. And then we just kind of extrapolate that going forward. So, by the way, it's not just you're more likely to be successful. The odds of the outcome are higher. So the expected value is much higher. And then we started saying, well, if it can be learned, then we can teach it. We just have to figure out how to teach it and simulate those conditions that they learn it as an entrepreneur. So your observations in your venture capital firm, Hunter, are consistent with the research.
Well, good. It was painfully learned, but I'm glad.
Wisdom is the scar tissue from all the mistakes you've made. That's what they call wisdom.
I've got a lot of it.
So do I.
So one last question about teaching, because it fascinates us about entrepreneurship inside corporations. Can you teach it inside a corporation? One of the thoughts that's come out of academia is this idea of ambidextrousness, that a big company like Google has to be entrepreneurial, but it also has to be tremendously efficient and effective in its everyday execution every day. Can you teach Google entrepreneurship?
It's very hard. So first of all, this is a topic that we teach a class here, and I worked at IBM for 11 plus years, and that is the epitome to me of seeing corporate entrepreneurship, because I worked there from 1981 to 1993. And there's actually a movie on Netflix you can go see it, Silicon Cowboys. My colleagues here say I should never tell anybody about that because I look like a fool in it. But that's how you learn, right? Because it was how IBM went from owning the computer industry and really having no competition to losing the computer industry because we were unable to sustain corporate entrepreneurship. And so I've thought a lot about this over the years and done some work with some of the largest companies in the world. And I will tell you, it is very hard. And let me just tell you, we can teach entrepreneurship in a startup environment because if you teach in a startup environment, it's a blank canvas. You say, here, Hunter, here's your blank canvas. We're going to teach you how to paint a picture on it. If you're working inside of Microsoft or Google, that's a Hunter. There's the canvas. It's already got a lot of painting all over it. This is your little piece, and you have to fit in with all that other stuff. Oh, by the way, the piece you have, it's got a rip in it. You got to fix that, and then you got to fit in with everything else there. So you need all those skills that you had to be able to paint on a blank canvas, plus integrate with these other parts of it. And the incentives are such that they're not the same. You see, the incentives when you're doing your own startup, you can make millions of dollars. You can create your own jobs. You can do all this great stuff. In a large organization, the incentives are different. So it is much more complicated, but it absolutely can and must be done. And there is no greater example of this right now than Microsoft. If you had asked me 5 years ago, or even 10 years ago, is there any hope for Microsoft? I would have said absolutely not. This is a classic case of hardening of the arteries. They had a monopoly. They made all this money. It's just, and they layers of bureaucracy. But if you look at, and I give the former chairman of Microsoft, John Thompson, a lot of credit for this, helping to kind of foster it because it has to come from the board and getting Satya in there. This is one of the most amazing corporate turnarounds ever. And it's happened right in front of our eyes. And I don't think people appreciate it. It's very hard to do that because not only do you need to have support from the board level because the incentives are not going to be right, but then you have to have leaders who can do it. Then you have to have middle management who will do it. And then you have to be able to attract the talent from the bottom. So, we just had this eclipse out here, full eclipse, solar eclipse. It's about as rare as a solar eclipse because you need all four of those planets lining up. And if one doesn't, it's not going to happen. But it must happen. And when it does, as you just saw with Microsoft, it has enormous impact. And we are not going to solve the biggest problems in our society by just having venture-backed startups. We must have, if we're going to address climate, we must reinvigorate the large corporates with the big balance sheets and the heavy infrastructure and the capital intensive investments they've made and turn those around. Otherwise, we're not going to. And oh, by the way, I have a lot of experience recently because I've been at MIT for over 15 years in corporate entrepreneurship. Because guess what? The most dysfunctional organization I have ever worked for by far is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And I love the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, don't get me wrong. It might be one of the most functional academic institutions, but academic institutions are not built to be efficient and effective. They're built to try to get the most Nobel Prize winners they can on their campus or within their square mile, whatever it is. And that does not lead to efficiencies of operation. And so I have worked within that, and it's been very frustrating at times, but it has been ultimately extraordinarily rewarding because when you sit on a platform like that and you can get it to work, you get a force multiplier effect that you would never get if I was doing this on a startup. It just would not happen.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm involved with a group of others, including university professors, is what we're thinking of as innovation and business education. We think we need to do it from outside the universities, not inside. But your Nadella story from Microsoft, he really started deep in the organization, right? He introduced all of those agile principles and entrepreneurship, not as CEO, but when he was running a division. And then the board and everybody else was smart enough to bring him to the top, and hence the turnaround. So maybe it can be done inside a university.
I'm a little biased on this. I think it's a really good discussion to have. You know, my take is to really fundamentally change things, you have to take the long view. And that's what universities are really good at. You know, I can't tell you whether Google's going to be around 100 years from now. 100? I don't know. I think it's a good chance it isn't. I don't know whether Microsoft will be around 100 years from now. I don't know whether Apple will be around. But you know who will be around 100 years from now? The Massachusetts Institute of Technology will be around, and Harvard will be around, and Stanford will be around, and that allows us to take a long view that you know these other places can't, and that's what kills corporate entrepreneurship. By the way, they have one leader who's very kind of into it, and then all of a sudden they retire, and then the next person says, "I got to do something new," and they rearrange the programs, they strip down things and start over again. And you have to take the long view on this. Now, that doesn't mean that academic institutions are good in all respects. They aren't, but they are good in that respect. And you have to take the good with the bad. But I think I would make a case that academic institutions would not do it by themselves, but have a positive role to play in, as you said, innovation and business education.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll get back to that. I wanted, though, for the benefit of everybody listening, to go through some of the specifics of your book. I urge everybody to get a copy because it's just so complete and so full of all the wisdom and, as you say, that you've picked up over the years, Bill, and the research that you've done. And let me start at the structure. You've got 24 steps and 6 themes in disciplined entrepreneurship. There's a lot of exercises and calculations and templates, which means it's a lot of work and a lot of data and a lot of evaluative testing and so on. Some people say, yeah, that's too complicated for entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs don't work that way. So explain that to us.
I've heard that. It was my publisher when they were very excited about it because they'd heard these reports, and then I kind of submitted the manuscript. They said, 24 is a lot, just like you said. I said, yes. So what are you suggesting here? I said, well, they've got this thing called 4-hour work week now, and it's very, very popular. And can't you make it simpler like that? And by the way, we don't like the word disciplined in the title either. I said, nope, I can't change that because it's not easy. And if someone wants to do that, there is no easy path to entrepreneurship. There's no reward for an easy job. It's hard work. And anyone to tell you that's otherwise is doing a disservice to honesty here. And so 24 steps was really a little on the light side. But I think in my experience of teaching literally now thousands of entrepreneurs, 24 steps is not overwhelming for them, and it gives them kind of a roadmap. And you see, we have this roadmap that goes with it, which people call the snakes and ladders kind of map. And it kind of gives you this guidance as to where you're going through the process. So, in the new book, I've actually snuck in 2 or 3 things, but everything is broken down as accessible. I think that's a really important point here. This book, if I make 3 points about it, 1, it's accessible. Like, you could pick this up, and you did, Hunter, and you can just go through it, and everything makes sense. There's no solving Fermat's theory here, equation here. It's like each thing is broken down to make sense. It's accessible. There's illustrations to explain stuff. If you don't get it, there's worksheets to help you. But at the same time, it must be rigorous, because there is no, the market is unforgiving. If you don't have a high quality product, if you don't have a solid go-to-market strategy, you will not make payroll. That's why I would say discipline is essential for an entrepreneur. And so accessibility and rigorous balanced together was 2 of the design points of it. And that comes through the 24 steps and the sequences that you do it, but you still kind of loop back so it's realistic. But I wanted to say the third thing is it's open source in the sense that every book that I had been read before that had been, here's the great idea I come up with. Here's the great idea I come up with. I didn't care about who came up with ideas when I was an entrepreneur. I just wanted to succeed. Tell me what works. And so this disciplined entrepreneurship is not my great thoughts. It's more built, as you just said, about wisdom. What are the mistakes I've made? What have I learned? And what tools worked that I found and I put them in a toolbox, and that worked for me. And going back to the rigorous stuff, it is open source, all these ideas, but they're brought back and analyzed and put into a toolbox of proven things that are accessible and rigorous. And that's the whole point of disciplined entrepreneurship. It's not, I didn't try to come up with brand new ideas. I took what already worked. You'll see design thinking in there. You'll see crossing the chasm. You'll see lean startup. You'll see the sales techniques I learned at IBM. You'll see the stuff that we saw worked at Procter & Gamble. If it worked, we took it and brought it into the toolbox.
Well, the other thing I'd add, Bill, for people who are listening is the case studies in the book. So when you say the word case study, that often feels like, some high-level summary or drawing out principles. But you've got cases of businesses either you've run yourself or you've supervised or you've been involved in, and the case studies use the tools in great detail at step by step. I found that a very great addition to the learning.
Well, thank you. It took, and I didn't try to have one thing that one thing, Hannah, this, like when you're trying to teach entrepreneurship, you sniff it out really quickly whether someone's been an entrepreneur or not. Theory doesn't get it done. You've got to have some theory, but you got to have practice, and you got to drive it down even into the tactics. And so in the examples, I try to show, here's how you apply the theory into practice and then get down into tactics. And with examples, again, that are accessible, that it's not like, here's Microsoft, here's Apple. These are people who started with 0 miles per hour that came into my office or came into my class, and they put these things together.
Yep. So one of the places you start is know the customer, and we preach that all the time. You got to start with the customer and understanding the customer need. Many technology companies don't do that. They start with the product or the technology. We know that debate. But part of disciplined entrepreneurship is really, 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 really digging into the customer. You've got a 6-column market segmentation matrix, and it's got 36 spaces on the grid, and it forces you to really narrow and tighten your customer definition, right? Is that the way to think about it?
100%. The biggest mistake, I should say, the most common cause of failure is entrepreneurs who fall in love with a technology here at MIT, or they fall in love with a product or an idea. That will lead you down a path where your odds of success are much lower. You need to not fall in love with your product. You need to not fall in love with your technology. You need to not fall in love. You need to fall in love with the customer's problem and opportunity. And when you do that simple change, all of a sudden your odds of success go up dramatically. And this, again, nothing I said. Simon Sinek says it really well. I think you referenced this, is don't start with the how and the what. Start with the why. And if you want to know the why, you have to know the who. Again, it wasn't just Simon Sinek. This is what they did at Procter & Gamble, and it worked. This is what design thinking is all about. Being an engineer, we take it to another level. Like, you have to drill down even further to really understand your market segmentation, because I get this question all the time. What's the most important step? And really, I used to say I love all my steps equally, but the fact of the matter is, it's step number one, market segmentation. If you don't do market segmentation well with rigor, then everything else thereafter is much less focused and much less likely to be successful. Yeah, we do a lot in that. And it's an engineering approach. But you know what? I can tell you this, Hunter, we just got our reports in here. It works. It works. The track record of success of people using this, we can put the report up on yours, is amazing. They're in business almost it's 5 years later at a rate of 69%. 63% of them raise money. And people who already have companies who go back and apply this to it, the studies show that they increase their revenue by an average of 4x 12 months later. This is a study done in Northern Ireland. So it works. And that's what we look for. I mean, we don't look for storytelling. We want proven, rigorous toolbox to help people do it, but it's also got to be accessible.
So one of the places that leads in the book is to the Beachhead market. That's a little different. Again, we were taught years ago to calculate the TAM, right? The total addressable market, which is always in the billions and sometimes the trillions. And you're saying, find your beachhead.
Yeah. It's not because I'm that smart. It's because I'm dumb, Hunter. You just look and see what works. Look around you and see what works. Did Jeff Bezos start with doing everything? No, he did one thing and did it well. And that was books. And then he landed and then he expanded. Or as my colleague here, Charlie, finally say, nail it and then scale it. Get one thing right. And when you look back, and this goes back to Jeffrey Moore in Crossing the Chasm, this is his concept. Again, I reuse it. As Pablo Picasso said, good artists create, great artists steal. I don't consider myself a great artist, but we like to call stealing lateral innovation. And Jeffrey Moore's great. And he was the one that had the Beachhead market. And it works. Just look at it over and over again. You'll see successful people. Apple, Facebook, Microsoft. Every time it starts off with a Beachhead market, land and expand. You're right, by the way. I just want to say this is, you hear these people, these venture capitalists say, it's got to be $1 billion market. Well, hopefully in time it's $1 billion market, but your initial market better not be $1 billion. You're trying to boil the ocean.
And then you get from the market segmentation to the beachhead market, and then you generate something you call a full cycle use case. What is that, Bill? And then I have another follow-up question on that.
There's this Clay Christensen, the late great Clay Christensen, called it jobs to be done. And we used to call it full life cycle use case in our companies. Is you don't just say the customer gets our product, hooks it up, and gets all this value. The question is, how did they know they had a problem? How did they get to know they had a problem? And then how did they find out about you? How did they acquire it? And then go through all this process and ultimately pay you? Because just because your product would be great doesn't mean they know about it. So really understanding this full life cycle use case is so essential to building a business, because customers just don't get a product and install it because it's a great product. I mean, there's a lot of great apps, but they have to install it on their phone before they're going to get any value. They have to know they have a problem before they get any value. So yes, this is widening the aperture from not falling in love with your product to falling in love with the customer problem you're solving.
Yeah, we call that the value learning cycle, Bill. So we have this concept that the customer learns what to want. So at the beginning, they see your value proposition. They say, well, is there anything in that for me? We have a fancy term for that's predicted value. And then they compare it with what they've got, and that's relative value. Then they buy it, that's exchange value. Then they use it, that's experience value. Did it work for me? I think that's the full cycle use case, right? Then they step back and say, did it meet my expectations?
Yeah. Again, there's a lot of this stuff is just rehashing what we know works and just putting it in a wrapper and presenting it to people in an accessible way. So that sounds like exactly the same thing. By the way, you look at startup companies, and I've had people say, oh, Jeff Bezos didn't read your book. See, you don't need, it's like, yeah, but Jeff Bezos, when you look at the principles that we're talking about, this is what he applied and made him successful. And so, you don't have to read the book. That's up to you. I hope you do, because I want the world to have more entrepreneurs and more that higher quality that are more successful. But you can go learn yourself. It's just I'm trying to make it easier for you.
Yeah. Yeah, we talk about starting with a customer. He said work backwards. So it's the same set of principles. Yeah. Let me stay in academia for a little bit. You ask, you've got to understand how customers determine value. And we're value subjectivists. It's in the customer's head. It's experiential. You can't determine that. How do they determine value? How do customers determine value?
So this is what we call ethnographic research. You have to go back and do, or primary market research is the term we use in the book, or ethnographic research is what academics also. Yeah, PMR, primary market research. What is their number one priority? Now, this is a simplification. Again, like, Einstein said, seek simplicity and distrust it. But what is the number one thing that keeps them up at night? What makes a difference between a good day and a bad day? And what do they fear most in the world? And then once you understand that, you know what's going to trigger them to actually buy a product. Because the biggest competitor you ever face when you're a new business, it is not some new startup in, Silicon Valley or Boston or New York. It is the status quo, the do nothing option, because there's always a tremendous amount of inertia. What is actually going to get them to move? And that you have to go back and say, what is the number one priority? What will get them fired? Maybe what will get them will get them promoted, but usually it's what will get you fired. What is the worst thing that could happen? Because that is a huge motivator. And then aligning your value proposition with that, just as you talked about with your value propositions, we talk about what's the as-is state, really, really understand that, and then say, what's the possible state with the thing that they care about most? And the example I use in the book is sensible technologies. It was time to market for designers. And people say it's about how much it costs. No, it is not. It was all about time to market. That translates down the road to more revenue, which is not more lower cost, but more revenue. And you always have to know what is that thing that they care most about. And it might be just that they get to sleep at night. It might be, that there's mean time to failure. It might be they get good PR. They get higher net promoter scores. Whatever it is, you need to understand that thing. And if you do, if you're lazy and you just say it's lower cost, you're much less likely to be successful. If you really dig in and understand what they really care about, your odds of success go up significantly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a deep insight. And again, I'm in academia here. We call it the highest value or the highest need. But you're saying the one thing that really matters to them, what are they really scared of?
Right. And, in academia, they'd say, well, it's more than one thing. It could be two. It could be. And it often is like you have, and I lay that out in the book, like here's 1 and 2. But when you're getting down to 3 or 4 things, and the problem is that what I see in these things is entrepreneurs love to make feature matrices. We have these features and our competitor has this, and we have more features than them, and therefore we're better. Well, those features only matter if they create benefits that the customer really cares about. And so you get into these feature wars, which are meaningless to the customer. And you really have to motivate them by getting inside their head and saying which thing creates the benefit that they really, really care about.
Yep.
You seem much more practical than just being an academic, though.
Yeah, I know. I'm tainted. Hey, business models, Bill. Business models appear pretty late in the book, or in the sequence of steps. And some people say, "Hey, it's all about the business model. You got to start with the business model." So, tell me about business models. One of the elements for folks who are listening, there's a list of 17 in the book, and you say it's not exhaustive. So, tell us about business models.
You can combine them. A business model, I mean, this is like people throw around the term business model all the time. A startup is really about creating value and then extracting value. And extracting value is what rent you get. I mean, think of entrepreneurship, it's actually quite simple. An entrepreneur comes in, there's no organization. Its job, the entrepreneur, it creates a new organization that creates value for someone and extracts a rent from someone, might be the same person, might be somebody else, extracts a rent for the value they create. And that rent exceeds their cost to continue operating, and therefore it's economically sustainable. So first we determine what's the value we create, and then we have to figure out what's the way that we extract rent for the value that we create. And that way that we extract rent is really only known after we understand how do we create value, how much value do we create, and for whom. Then we can think about, what's our model, that is our business model to extract rent? Is it a one-time charge? Is it a subscription model? Is it a per usage model? Is it an advertising model? Is it a commission model? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that, that is often overlooked. Not enough time is spent on that. I know I didn't in my companies, and I know that was a mistake. But when people do that, it turns out it's a big game changer for them. But I think that it has to be after you understand how much value you create, when do you create it, who do you create it for, and now we can look at which model is most appropriate. And that also is a chance to gain competitive advantage. You have to understand what the competitors are doing as well.
That's also the point at which in the book you've got pricing. You don't do pricing until you've done all of those other steps that we've talked about, because you got to have the business model conceptually before you can have the pricing tactic, right?
Yeah, entrepreneurs spend a lot of time on pricing very early on before they even understand how much value they create, who do they create it for, when do they create it, how much, a lot of things. But then they do these elaborate studies. Let me tell you, I don't mean to be condescending towards these studies. You never know how much someone's going to pay until you actually put the product in front of them and see how they use it. So anything that you spend on pricing, you got to understand it's a best guess. And then you have to iterate very rapidly through that. And we talk about this in the book. There's a lot of behavioral economics studies that talk about, like the book Predictably Irrational and other behavioral economists that show you need to do A/B testing to figure this out. That's my take. I think you have to come up with some sort of pricing. And I'm not saying pricing isn't important. I just think you come up with your best guess, and then you kind of run once you hit the market, you run a lot of A/B testing to see what the right price point is. And then you kind of go from there. And that will vary over time. And I think there's a lot of work being done by our students and elsewhere in dynamic pricing to show that, pricing is not as much, it's not a stasis activity that just you set it and you forget about it.
Yeah, in fact, I think in the digital age, we've come up with a whole new theory of pricing and subscriptions. That's a different way to do pricing, a different way to think about pricing. It's a relationship. It's not a price, really. But I think that's an innovation.
Definitely is. And I think there's a lot of innovation there. But let me say this, Hunter, is when my students come in, I say, what type of business do you have? And they say, I have a SaaS business. I'm like, that tells me absolutely nothing except that you don't really understand what your business is yet, because SaaS isn't a business. Who's your customer? SaaS is just a way to deliver, to extract value later on. You shouldn't be talking about that. You shouldn't be talking about that at this point. That will come later.
Yeah, that's a technology mindset, right? Not a customer mindset. So After all these years and all this study and everything that you've done, Bill, do you think America is still an entrepreneurial society? I just finished writing a book that looks back to the entrepreneur owners of the 19th century, the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and so on like that. And they didn't have financial markets and they didn't have a lot of investors. They certainly didn't have business schools, but they were driven to create value. They did it in an entrepreneurial sense. It was, that great entrepreneurial drive of the time. But maybe that's become eroded or it's become jaded, it's become bureaucratized, and all of those things. Do we think we're in a good place or a bad place as regards entrepreneurship?
I think we've never been more entrepreneurial, and that's just by necessity. Because I look at some of the entrepreneurs today, and they're so good, and because they need to be. The world has never been moved as fast as it is now, and it will not slow down. It's only going to get faster and faster, and so that's entrepreneurship. The entrepreneurship is succeeding in a fast-moving, changing world. So I think you have to move. Think of how fast the world's going now. Everything was great. General Electric until it wasn't. And so I think this entrepreneurial thing, look at what's happened. I mean, I thought we were entrepreneurial. You can look back and say at IBM, we did the personal computer revolution. Look at how, I think we set 43,000 units in our third year or whatever. It might have been our second year. And we were like, oh my God, 43,000, this is incredible. Da, da, da. ChatGPT got 1 million users in 5 days. They had 100 million users, I think, in 2 months. I mean, the pace of change is just extraordinary now. And you have to be an entrepreneur. I mean, I think even at the board level, these calls all the time, how can we be more entrepreneurial? They know it because it's a Darwinian selection process. When you see General Electric, going down on the verge of bankruptcy, and you see Chewy.com being put into the S&P 500, it's like, Chewy.com, this is a dog food company. Why are they so great? Because they're very disciplined about how they went about building their business. They were extraordinarily entrepreneurial. So I think on the other end of the spectrum, Hunter, I think the entrepreneurs of the past would have had to adapt and be at just a whole different clock speed today than they were. I think we as educators, we have to do more to make entrepreneurship a serious field of study that's rigorous, accessible, and practical, and not have it be something that's just kind of unique to every place we go. It should be common. That's really what this is about. And I could not be, it was funny, I don't know if you saw what I put out this morning. Just this morning, for the second week in a row, we are in this ridiculous book, Disciplined Entrepreneurship, which is, is just a book about how to become an entrepreneur. Nothing sexy, no novels here, it's in the bestsellers. It's 14th this week for bestsellers nationally. It was 12th last week. This is an entrepreneurship educator's book for teaching entrepreneurship. That gives me hope, Hunter, that the field of entrepreneurship is now being taken seriously, and we can move forward and do a better job as educators to create more and better entrepreneurs who are also connected, where we agree on, hey, beachhead markets are right, as opposed to let's come up with different names for things.
Yep. Well, good. Well, thank you, Bill, for taking the time to talk to us today. I recommend the book to everybody. You recommend they get the hard copy, right, as opposed to the Kindle version, so they can...
Don't get the Audible. Yeah, make notes on it. Download the poster and follow along with it, because it's a very visual reference book. And Hunter, I want to thank you for having me. This is great. I used to come to San Diego a lot because I was on a board there, MyTech Systems, and what a wonderful place.
It is. We're very happy here and very, very lucky. We've got a booming entrepreneurial community here, especially in biotech, but also was where Qualcomm started, and we're pretty entrepreneurial down here.
Absolutely. The funny thing is, I'm a basketball player. This is the last thing, Hunter, and I grew up in New York, and every good basketball player used to come through New York, and you'd see them all. Now today, basketball players come from anywhere. The best basketball player in the world comes from Serbia. You know, he doesn't even go to play. He never played at the Rucker. In Harlem. He never. And it used to be in entrepreneurship. You knew everyone. It was in Silicon Valley. It was in Boston. Not the case anymore. Just like in basketball, the world, as Thomas Friedman, the world is flat. The entrepreneurship can come up anywhere. It can come up anywhere now with all the tools and with what's available. And that's exactly what we need. That's exactly what we need to deal with the problems we have. So thank you very much for having me, Hunter. It's been an honor to be on your show, and I hope this has been helpful to everyone who's listening.
I think it has been. It's our honor, and I really appreciate it. And we'll follow you on Twitter and everywhere else you communicate, and buy the book.
On LinkedIn. I prefer the longer form
Okay.
LinkedIn than on Twitter.
Good. Well, that's the new social media for entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Good. Well, Bill, thank you very much.
This has been another episode of the Value Creators Podcast. Thanks for listening. You can visit thevaluecreators.com for links and resources related to this episode, and check out hunterhastings.com for more content on entrepreneurial business management based on value creation principles.